days that on the industry can create around flowering trees. I think that's amazing. It's crazy.
Okay, well, so for those of you, the mic's okay? Okay, great. So for those of you who know me and know me well, and for those of you who don't, I started work for Andy in 2005, before the first Busboys and Poets ever opened. And so we're going to try to get through this without bursting into laughter that no one else gets besides he and I, because we have that kind of relationship. But we're going to try to keep it professional. We're going to try to keep it professional, and we're also going to have some fun in this discussion.
So Pamela had applied to work at the bookstore as a salesperson at the bookstore, and we had already hired a marketing director. And last minute, the marketing director had to move to California for family reasons, and so the opening came up, and I was like, oh my God, that's such an important role for the company, and we were almost ready to open, and I just panicked. I didn't know, start over again and try to interview people and so on. Very great. Thank you so much.
That's not a flat surface.
It's all right. It's a little bit of an angle. Perfect. There you go. Thank you. I was looking for somebody. So the bookstore manager at that time, we were having a conversation. I was telling him, I said, I'm really panicked about this, and he said, this woman that applied, her name is Pamela, and she has pretty good experience, and maybe you can interview her. And the first interview that we had, we hit it off so well. She was a shoo-in, and we're so glad the way things turned out, because she was perfect for the job.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you for that. So this year, Busboys and Poets turns 20. In some ways, I know, right? In some ways, it feels like the blink of an eye. In other ways, Busboys has been such a meaningful part of so many historic events in the DMV community that we can't help but honor the many years of service and steady contributions to the cultural development of the area. So the Busboys origin story is also a story of creating community. So first of all, congratulations on 20 years.
Thank you.
And then also the new memoir. The book is entitled A.C.T.O.R, at the Table, The Making of Busboys and Poets. And so I want to start, and first, again, those of you that want to buy the book can buy the book here today. The foreword is by Angela Davis, which, wow, that is huge. And so congratulations on that. Again, the title, A Seat at the Table, it's a powerful title. And so I want to ask you first, what does having a seat at the table mean to you personally and politically?
Having a seat at the table, I think, to me, means that you're not just an observer; you're actually a participant. And I got that from Ralph Nader, who I became very, very close friends with, and he reminded me that democracy is not something that you just vote and walk away from, but it's at work. It's really hard work. And unless you're willing to make that commitment, you're going to lose it. And we're seeing some of that being framed right now as we're sitting right here. For me, having a seat at the table is being involved in the process of making this country, this world, a better place. So that's professionally and politically. So I wanted to make sure that I created a place, when I did Busboys and Poets, that would provide me that seat at the table, to have it be a place where people come together, talk about race, talk about politics, in a way that is not difficult, that is not elitist, that doesn't keep them away, that's very accessible, And that was kind of like the beginning, really, of Busboys and Poets, creating that kind of space that I can sit at and invite other people to the table.
So kind of creating your own table.
Basically.
Yeah, it's because I'm wondering if you feel like you weren't invited to the table, so that you had to create your own.
Well, there were many instances where I didn't feel I was invited. I talk a little bit about in the book about working at a hotel, at a corporate style hotel, and I wanted to advance as I was in food and beverage. I was a manager there, and I wanted to advance to the director, food and beverage director, or an assistant director. And that opportunity was really hard to come by because I didn't look the part. I didn't have the background to be the part. Most of those folks that were getting those jobs were of European background and had an English accent or a French accent or a Belgian accent, one of those European style accents. And I knew that I was passed up over an opportunity that I thought I was very qualified for. This set me kind of thinking in terms of like, I'm not going to find this seat at this table. I need to find my own.
Okay, so we created. I shared with the audience that we created this continuing talk on race. Um, Really, it was less than 6 months after Busboys opened, because we started this in February 2006. And I share a lot of this story when I introduce Actor Monthly. I share the story of how we were joking around in the restaurant one day, because people kept coming in saying, "Oh, is the owner black? The owner's got to be black, right? Oh, I'm so glad to be in a black place." And Iraq, Andy is Iraqi born. And so we were joking. We were saying, gosh, we should put it on the frequently asked questions. Is the owner black? And we should say something about your background. And the discussion turned more serious, and we thought, the space has a place for discussion. Let's let's talk about race. Clearly people want to talk about it. And so we came up with the idea to have a continuing talk on race. I came up with the acronym. We commissioned the logo, and that's how the series was born. And so over the years, um, it has, as I said earlier, it has been a space where people could come and have open dialogue about issues of race, class, and culture. What we found very early on was conversations about race also included conversations about class and culture. One of the things um, that struck me um, on that day in June 2005 when we first met, it was before the store even opened, was was as we had a conversation, I was struck by Andy's understanding of race in America. How you spoke unabashedly about American anti-Black racism, but it was only after reading the book that I connected the dots that linked your first moments in this country to your understanding of race, particularly the black and white dynamic in this country. So I would like you to actually read from page 1, and I've got mine all marked here if you want to do mine or whatever. I can give you the page number or get your glasses out.
Okay, yeah. If you give me
Okay.
the page, I'll read it. Yeah.
Okay, so this is, well, I've got it marked.
This page 1?
Yeah, I've got it marked, Andy.
Okay.
Use mine. Down at the bottom.
From as we arrived.
Yeah.
Really? You want me to read all that?
Oh, come on. It's the book.
It's, writing is funny. Writing a memoir is funny because some of it is like, you write this stuff and you hope people don't read it. At some level. So it's kind of like, it's very, it's different when you're talking to somebody on the phone or sending just a quick text to someone. But when you're putting it in writing in a book, for some reason it makes it more official. and suddenly, like you read it, and it's kind of cringy. So this is a cringe moment.
So you, just to set the stage though, you arrived in the U.S. in 1966, and the passage that I've asked Andy to read details the moments after you and your family arrived in the U.S. So.
Okay. My uncle has since died, so I wouldn't have written this had he still been alive. Just FYI. As we arrived at the National Airport, my Uncle Saham was waiting for us along with a cluster of friends, a handful of officials from... Now, you also have to remember that my father was a diplomat. We came here as diplomats. So I was at an event earlier today where they were talking about immigrant stories. And I said, yeah, I am very keenly aware of immigrant stories, ones of harrowing crosses of rivers and you know, coyotes taking across, you know, vast land masses and, you know, having to suffer and you know, face horrible things. That's not how we came to the United States. I came to the United States on a first-class ticket on Swiss Air. And we were met at the airport with a red carpet and a VIP reception. So FYI, my father was a diplomat when we came here. So a handful of people waiting from the Iraq embassy, one or two people my parents knew from before. I had not seen my uncle for years, but soon spotted him standing in the front of a small group of well-dressed men and women. He was easy to pick out, dark and stocky with a thick head of fine hair. He was in his 30s, but looked older and frumpier than I remembered. I had forgotten that he lived here, and I was happy to see a familiar face in a sea of strangers. He had come to America to study international law at George Washington University, and like most Iraqis who studied abroad, he never went back. Anas, look at how dark you are. These are the first words out of my uncle's mouth the minute he saw me. Anas Habibi, why are you so dark? He repeated with a pitiful tone. You must have been in the sun a lot. I was stunned and just stood there hoping to disappear. Then he turned to my father. Why do you let him out in the sun so much? Facing me again, he ran his hands across the top of my head. Look at your hair. Where did you get this wool? I'm sure people will think you are black. You should not play in the sun. Be careful. Americans don't like black people. You will see. Be careful. His machine gun barrage continued. They call black people Negroes, he said, stretching the word Negroes, and then gave out a big laugh.
Wow, so that was the day he arrived.
Somebody liked it.
No, I'm going to ask you to read a few times. So, so based on that, I want to ask you, how have your own experiences as an Arab American impacted your understanding of anti-blackness and systemic racism in this country?
Well, racism comes in different shapes and sizes and colors also. I mean, we're seeing it right now, the anti-Muslim, you know, movement that's running rampant, arresting people and spiriting them away and disappearing them for days on end without people knowing where they are in the middle of the day. Pretty scary times. So, you know, racism can be, you know, we always seem to need some sort of boogeyman, some kind of bad person or bad guys or whatever to try to go after. You know, so I think I witnessed the whole idea of race in a very direct way after 9/11. When 9/11 happened, for Arabs and Muslims, it was a very difficult time living in this country. Everyone was suspect. And if you were Arab or looked Arab or, you know, resembled anything Arab looking, then you were seen as the enemy. And the first time flying, I remember, was really a scary time because...
The first time after 9/11.
After 9/11, first time flying after 9/11, it was very frightening because I really didn't know what to expect when I got to the point where they would check your passport or get you on the plane. So for me, I mean, I was so envious of people that were there going on vacations. All they're thinking about is what they're going to do when they get there. They're thinking about the fun things, the place they're going to go to, the place they're going to eat at, the friends they're going to meet. And I'm thinking about I hope they don't find anything in my bag that doesn't look right or that might resemble something. We used to tuck, my mother had this habit of tucking a Quran inside your bag when you're traveling for safety, good luck, whatever. We stopped doing that because we're afraid that for whatever reason, if somebody opened up your bag and found a Quran in there, they might assume that you're a terrorist or some ridiculous thing like that. So yeah, racism is definitely a part of America's DNA.
So if you could go back and speak to that 11-year-old that arrived here in the States, that 11-year-old version of yourself, that boy in Virginia trying to pat his hair down and not have it be woolly, what would you tell him now?
Be your full self. I mean, that's the thing. I think we each bring something to the table, and I really am ashamed, frankly, and upset that I didn't have the support system that I would have liked to have. I think that was the issue. Is I didn't have peers. I didn't have a support system. I wasn't black. I wasn't white. I was in this other, and other is not a place that any 11-year-old wants to be in. So to be thrown in that heap of other seemed so unfair, and certainly very lonely, because you didn't know where you fit in. And I mean, I think I decided to catch up later, so like go back and kind of recorrect some of the situations that I was placed in by being unabashedly proud of who I am, how I present myself, and who I want to include in this table.
So you created in what we've seen in Busboys and Poets is your creation of a model of blending politics, activism, and business. I know people constantly ask how you came up with the idea of Busboys and Poets. One, I want to ask you, what do you think they're really asking when they say that? And two, do you think people are surprised that a restaurant can be a political space?
Yeah, I mean, in business school, they always tell you keep your opinions out of your business most of the time. I mean, especially if you're doing a business like this that is a public space where you want as many people to walk through the door as possible. So to limit your trough of possibilities seems like you're shooting yourself in the foot. I think there's plenty of people around, and I don't feel, I always felt, this idea, we've talked about this before, this idea of work-home balance or work-life balance that we always talk about. I could never understand what that means, because it just assumes that during work you're dead, and somehow afterwards you live. And every day you die for whatever number of hours, and then you resurrect yourself whenever you get home, whatever. And I thought that is like the weirdest kind of setup. And it feels like and of course, you're also sleeping a lot, right? So between sleep, which kind of is like a sort of death, and your work, that's another kind. So basically, you're just living like 4 hours a day. So I just feel that seems so wrong.
This is perfect, because I'd like you to read this passage here that talks about that.
I once read somewhere that combining politics and business is a bad idea, but as skewers at Cafe Luna, I would prove the idea wrong. I not only combined the two of these restaurants, I did it openly and publicly and made it work. My outspokenness about the Gulf War and other social and political issues was known to everyone. I made sure that there was no doubt where I stood when it came to American foreign policy or gay rights or capital punishment or women's rights to choose. It seemed the more I spoke out, the busier we got. This was not a publicity stunt, but a realization that whether you agree or not, people respect someone who's willing to take a stand. I had no interest or time for living in compartments. Life's too short. I worked and lived full-time and never bought into the idea of work-life balance, as if work is not life. I know people who work normal jobs and have nights and weekends off. They plan their vacations, their time off, their weekends, and they count down to retirement. From what I could see, they are no happier or more satisfied than I am.
I love that. I love that passage of the book because it does really sum up how you live your life in that, people say, well, Andy's always at the restaurant. Well, the restaurant's a big part of his life.
And
So he's at one of the spaces all the time.
And mind you, this is not only in my places, wherever I work. I mean, I think, the idea of an entrepreneur, you always think of entrepreneurs. When you think of entrepreneurs, you think of people that have their own businesses or they have their own, hustle. But entrepreneurship is a mindset. It's really not just about having your own business. Of course, it's great to have your own business and you can be an entrepreneur, but also you can be entrepreneurial wherever you are, in any kind of job you do. So I've always had that entrepreneurial mindset where I make the best and really found joy in pretty much any job that I've ever had. Whether I was washing dishes or whether I was waiting tables, I really loved all of these jobs. I can't remember a job that I hated. And if I ever did, I didn't last for more than a day or two. I knew right away this wasn't for me, and I had to just find a different way. But I think it's important to think in terms of finding joy in whatever you're doing, because that's what life should be about.
So, a big part of the story of Busboys and Poets, we see all the events. It's been all this activism and politics, but Andy never failed to remind us, this is a restaurant. We are running a restaurant in here, and that service was important. You described the various restaurants and service roles you've been in the restaurant business, including your first experience at your father's pizza place in Falls Church as Busboys Boot Camp. Your first restaurant in DC, however, Skewers, was a turning point for you. You were exploring a modern take on Middle Eastern food. And again, part of what has been part of your story the whole time is we are creating a space for people to come and share food and drink. This is what's going to underline all that we do, is going to be this place, creating this place for people to share food and drink. And I was moved in the book when you talked about that. Well, I got this idea, from a patron that came in and said we should try to start a Middle Eastern place. I was used to Italian, and I knew Middle Eastern food, but I didn't really ever cook it. And so I want you to actually read a little bit about how you came to cook Middle Eastern food, and that's the piece. It starts here, although. Why do you keep taking your glasses off?
I can't see people with my glasses on. They're for reading. Duh.
But yeah, I think as Pamela said, I think the restaurant is really an important foundation for everything that we do. It's like, to me, it's like art. You can have art that represents, activism or something, but if it's not good art, it's just bad art. And it sort of makes you kind of feel kind of about what the message that it's trying to say, you know what I mean?
Right.
So I always think like this is, if we're talking about political issues that really deep, and the food is bad, you'll be thinking like, the food is bad, I don't know what the issue, whatever. It's like, I'm not saying that's always how people feel, but there's definitely a sense that something is missing. We have to do it all right or not do it at all, for me.
That's clearly how you feel.
Yeah. And so the Middle East restaurant that Pamela was talking about was Skewers. Although this was food that was familiar to me, I had never before cooked it and wasn't confident I could pull it off. I knew that the key to any successful restaurant was first and foremost the food. For a Middle Eastern restaurant, the rice would have to be perfect. It is the dish by which the entire menu will be judged. I called my mother to get her advice on making the rice. Her rice was always delicious and fluffy. Make sure you wash your rice with cold water. Put some oil in the bottom of a pot and make it very hot. Once the oil starts to smoke, pour the wet rice on top of it and stir it well. Then add water to 1 inch above the rice, about the tip of your finger, no higher. My mother never followed recipes. Her kitchen does not have a measuring cup or measuring spoon or even a rolling pin. She relied on her tongue, her palm, and her fingers. She made the same things over and over again, yet her food tasted slightly different each time. If she didn't have cilantro, parsley was a good substitute. Wheat flour replaced white flour. Lime was substituted for lemon. These are subtle changes that added intrigue to her cooking.
Thank you for that.
Mhm.
It's your first restaurant, Skewers, was not only a turning point for kind of thematic restaurant um, for you to explore the Middle Eastern cuisine, but it was also uh, where you got your political awakening in many ways and started to fuse the two. One of the things you say in the book is that politics was in your heart and the restaurant was your stage. So it reminds me, though, in the book, food is deeply political. And I want to know, what does it mean to serve dishes like hummus, maklama, and full in DC? What does it mean to serve dishes like that? I don't know what is that? Anyway,
Is it the speaker? Yeah. Oh, strange. Scary. Um,
so yeah, back to the question.
Leadership represents so much with food, right?
Yeah.
If you want to be inclusive, this is creepy,
Uh-huh.
right? Do we want to do something about it?
Okay, let's see if we can.
I don't know. Just ignore it? Okay. Everybody's okay with that? Good.
Wayne, do you know what this is? This thumping kind of.
Yeah.
We're having a technical issue, so
Yeah,
sorry,
this,
you guys.
This sort of like thump on the speaker. You know what that might be? This is Wayne, ladies and gentlemen. Um, anyway, I'll continue while this is happening. I wanted to, if you're going to create a place that's going to be inclusive, you have to have lots of different things. For instance, for years, and things have gotten much better in restaurants, but for years there was, if you're a vegetarian and you were part of a group of friends going out to eat, they all like, oh God, Mary's coming, like she's a vegetarian. And we gotta like figure out where we're gonna go. We can't go to this place, we gotta go to this place. You're the one, huh? And so then it's like everybody kind of like says, come on, Mary, you gotta go there. And so they drag Mary along and they go to this restaurant that doesn't have any vegetarian necessarily items on there. And they ask the server, do you have anything vegetarian? The server's like stunned. He's not sure what to do, but he said, we'll figure something out. Okay, and comes out with either a salad or a plate of steamed vegetables, and so poor Mary ends up, having to suffer through this. Well, things have changed quite a bit now. Restaurants have lots of options, and you can find vegetarian things all over the place, but I wanted to make sure, when we opened the place in 2005, that we had not only vegetarian, but we had vegan items, and we had things that were special diet items, people who were gluten-free or who had some lactose intolerance or had issues like that. Those ideas were fairly new at that time. Like most people, I would say, the average person didn't know what a vegan was. They may have known vegetarian, but vegan was kind of taken hold. So anyway, I wanted to have those items in there. And I wanted to have the Middle Eastern stuff because that's me at some level. I'm bringing myself into the picture as well. So I wanted to look like an eclectic mix of different types of food so that everyone that walks in there can feel that they belong, that there's something there for them.
And I think you definitely established that. Anyway, one theme that has occurred in your story, and something that I shared in the introduction before you arrived, is how one person can make such a huge difference in whatever issue or situation there might be. We think we don't have any power, and I think really what happens is us not owning our own power is what takes our power away, when we think we don't have any power. But everybody has some power and can make a difference. You had such a moment at Skewers when you had a review in the Washington Post. You had opened Skewers, you had left your Italian place here in Virginia, first restaurant in DC, you opened Skewers, and you're waiting. You're waiting for this review. And for those of you of a certain age that are from the DC area may remember Phyllis Richmond, who was the food critic for the Washington Post. And so, every restaurant wanted Phyllis to come to their restaurant and review them, or not, and review them. And you talk about um, when she came to the restaurant. I would like you to read a little bit more. So
Okay.
it was a good read, Andy. So I just want you to read just from here.
Okay. To where? From here to.
To there.
Oh, that.
Yeah.
So this is like I'm on pins and needles. Phyllis Richmond had walked into the place, and our eyes met. She's standing at the front of the restaurant. You're not supposed to recognize her because she's always in disguises, but I knew that was her. And so I pretended like I didn't. And I pretended like everything was normal. My heart was, of course, beating so hard I thought she could hear it. And so she sat down, and sure enough, she ordered like lots of different things. She was with her husband at the time, and then she came back again because she came back 3 times. They do it. That's how they do it. And then the photographer called and made the appointment, took the photos, and then it was time for the review to come out. But back then, right now, like the reviews, they take the photos and the review's out like in 2 days. It was like a
And
very
you can see it
different.
online.
Yeah, I can see it online, right? Back then, there was no online, and you had to wait for the review to come out in the magazine, in the Washington Post, which is no longer there. The magazine is gone. But anyway, the magazine was a big deal, and it was in the Post, and every week, Phyllis Richmond would have her review. And everyone, there was no social media, there was no influencers, there was no Yelp, none of these things that people now use to go out to eat. This was specifically the most powerful woman in DC for restaurants, bar none. The night before the review was due to hit the street, my mind was popping with anxiety. Doubt was winning. Sleep took a back seat. I lay awake in bed, waiting for the dawn to arrive. By 4 a.m., I was too anxious to stay put. I got up, dressed hastily, jumped in my car, and drove to the Washington Post building in downtown DC, a good 30 minutes away. It was a balmy October morning. I sped through the slick, empty streets, the glare of flashing yellow traffic signals reflected against the wet pavement. I pulled up on 15th Street across from the loading dock of the Post. Through the fine drizzle, I could see stacks of Sunday paper under a plastic tarp sitting on the sidewalk, waiting to be loaded onto nearby vans. My review, my future, was sitting right in front of me. I stepped out of the car and approached a worker guarding the bundles. "Can I get one of those papers?" I asked. He replied with a curt, "No, you'll have to buy them at the store." "Please," I responded. "I have a review for my restaurant in the paper and I was not able to sleep all night. I just want to get one magazine. That's all, just one." Maybe it was my eyes welling with tears. Maybe it was my pathetic begging. Whatever it was, I was able to walk away with a copy of the paper. I thanked him and even offered to pay. He turned me down. I went back to the car and sat for a few moments. By then, I was a tangle of anxiety. I took a deep breath and gathered enough courage to unroll the newspaper and open the Sunday magazine with a deliberate slowness reserved for high school senior awaiting college acceptance letter. I peeked past the first page, then the second. And on to the table of contents. Skewers, simple and spirited, it read. And beneath it was a photograph of a skewer of shrimp floating in front of a lacy black and gold fabric. I quickly turned the pages and read the first few lines. We haven't had a new Middle Eastern restaurant in Washington for a while, and we have never had one like Skewers. Much of what Skewers does could be done almost anyone with a food processor and a grill, but few could make it such fun. I couldn't have asked for much better. The fact that Phyllis Richmond thought that of my restaurant was thrilling beyond words. This was the mother of all breaks, and I knew right then and there I was now part of an exclusive club of restaurateurs that had made it. I settled back in the seat, gave a sigh of relief, and let a tear or two wash away my anxiety.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And I shared that because, and I wanted you to read that particular passage because it is how one person can make a difference in someone's life. Phyllis was probably asleep when you were reading that review. She didn't know that that it was the turning point of you staying in the restaurant business.
I actually ran into her one time at an event years later, many, many years later, and I told her the story. I told her you were the one that really kept me in the restaurant business because I probably would have left the restaurant business altogether, believe it or not. It was that important and that essential because when we opened Skewers, and the story is in the book, things weren't so well. It took a very long time for us to get people through the door. I wasn't that familiar with reaching out, getting people in, really, doing the groundwork that's necessary to get people through the door. People think you just open the door, people show up. They don't. It's work. It's a lot of work. Pamela will tell you, she did marketing for us. So it's a real challenge. So when I told her this, she was so thankful, so grateful, like, oh wow, I'm amazing, and I just recently told Tom Seisman this. I actually wanted her to read the book. I don't know if she has or not, but I sent her a PDF copy.
But so skewers, okay, so again, there is this theme that goes through restaurants, political activism, restaurants, and at Skewers, again, it was your first restaurant in DC, and it was your deep dive into political activism. It came well after your commitment to the restaurant business, particularly there at Skewers, but your big customer at the time was Ralph Nader's Center for Responsive Law. It was located nearby. Ralph Nader had an office nearby, I think, and he would convene staff, activists at Skewers.
Yeah.
And so it gave you a bird's eye view of participatory democracy in action. He was convening activists. He was writing policy. He was, lobbying Congress. And so the restaurant's success, first of all, gave you that political insight, but it also allowed you to open Cafe Luna, which led to Luna Books and Democracy Center. And so your relationship with Ralph Nader um, led you to Howard Zinn, who is for both of us a huge influence, inspiration. He is revered by us. And so I want you to talk a little bit about how you met Howard, how Ralph asked you to host him, and kind of what that meant. I want you to tell us a little bit about your relationship with Howard and how it shaped your political views.
Ralph Nader, I remember the first time that he walked in, of course I'd heard about him, I'd read about him, I knew who he was, but I'd never met him. And so he walked into Skewers one day because his office was like half a block away. And he, ordered some stuff, and I walked up to him and I said, it's very nice to meet you, Mr. Nader, blah, blah, blah. And so he was really happy to say hello. And he became a regular, and he started coming in, and then I started sitting with him, and we were having, we'd have lunch together, we'd have, sometimes dinner together, and he would sometimes he would leave the restaurant, and Skewers was a half a floor up from the main road, I mean from the sidewalk. And so it's not easy to walk into. Like you have to know it to walk in. Most people don't make that walk up unless they know where they're walking into. So sometimes Ralph would be leaving and he'd be coming down the stairs, and we had a menu at the bottom of the stairs. And you would see customers standing looking at the menu. He says, "The food is really good, go up there." And people looked like, "Was that Ralph Nader? Did this over?" So it was really kind of funny. But he became really just a great ally. What was the question?
Howard. It was about Howard.
Oh, Howard.
Because he was the one that said, "I want you to."
So one day, he and I really hit it off in a serious way. We used to have lots of conversations about politics, about democracy, about civic engagement, you name it. And so one year, Ralph was doing this retreat or workshop for civic education teachers. He wanted middle school and high school teachers who taught civics in high schools throughout, or in public schools throughout the country. And it was, you had to like apply to get in, and he got like 45 slots to come in. And he said, "Do you want to be part of this group?" And I said, "Hell yeah." So I was part of that group. And I would go every day. It was like a week-long intensive workshop on civic activism. And one of the speakers that he had invited was Howard Zinn. So Howard came, and of course I was like, my jaw is dropped, and I'm listening to Howard Zinn teaching me civics. And it was really kind of exciting to do that. And of course, having a restaurant is like, what do you do after the conversation? You go out to eat. So invited Howard and some of the participants to come, and we would stay there almost all night long, chit-chatting about everything. People's history, like, wow, like he's actually living people's history right in front of me, right there. So it's really, really exciting. And so when the conference was ready to be over, Howard was there for a couple of days, actually, doing this. When the conference was over, he was there with his wife, Roz, who I just adored, the two of them. They were kind of like surrogate parents to me for some time. But when they were getting to go, we had one last lunch together, and Howard shared with me, he said, "I'm doing a play called Marx in Soho." And he said it's about Karl Marx, the father of communism. And he said, it's a funny play. He said it's about Karl Marx, who lived in Soho, England. He gets a dispensation from the gods to come back on Earth because he had just seen the fall of the Soviet Union and how that was kind of tied with communism and how that's failed. He said, that's not communism. That's something that Stalin put together. That's something that is not what he felt like what true communism should be. And so he was sent back to Earth by the gods in this play to correct the record and tell people what communism is really all about. And so when the gods sent him, they made a mistake. Instead of sending him to Soho, England, they sent him to Soho, New York. And so he ends up landing in the middle of Soho, New York, in this, capitalist kind of, cauldron. And so he ends up, telling. So the story, the play begins with him, Karl Marx, opening the door of a theater where there's an audience sitting there, and he says, "What are you guys doing here?" And then he starts telling them the story of communism. So that was the play. So I told Howard. So Howard was saying, "I'm almost done with this play. I'm looking for a producer. I really want to be able to produce it, have as many people see it as possible because I think it's good, blah, blah, blah." And I said, "I'll produce it." So I didn't know what producing a play means yet. But it was like, okay, I'll do it. What the hell? So he said, "Okay, like, seriously?" I said, "Yes." I said, "Just give me a copy and I'll look at it in both days." So he leaves after lunch, and right before they leave to go to Boston, he comes and brings me an envelope with the original typed copy of the play. And he said, "Take a look at it. tell me what you think, and we'll talk. So, and he puts his address and phone number. I said, I have address and phone number of Howard Zinn, like shit. You know, so anyway, I know. So I end up reading, like the minute he left, I'm like reading and outlining everything, putting marks in the margins and all of this. And you know, within like a day, I shipped it back to him. You know, it was all mail then. It wasn't like this. So I mailed it back to him. Waited a few days. He called me, and we went over it. And he'd go over the laugh lines. He'd go over this. He would come over sometimes to DC to spend some time to talk about it. And then we produced it. He was here to hire the director and hire the actor and hire, you know, and we chose actually it was the Church Street Theater. For those of you that know, the Church Street Theater then became Woolly Mammoth, and then Woolly Mammoth moved out, but it was the Church Street Theater on Church Street between 17th and 18th Street, I believe, yeah. So, and it was a small theater, 110 seats, and it was perfect.
Very close to Skewers.
Very close to Skewers, exactly, it was like a half a block away, walk. And so we produced it, and it was a great production. It was really fun. I mean, it's minimal, right? It's one actor. It's a backstage, so there's no real set, you know. So I was doing like concessions and sound cues and doing like engineering. So I learned everything about theater from A to Z. So it's so much fun. I had a ball doing it, and it was a weekend, and we did it for like I think probably 5 shows, and he was there for every show and got a standing ovation each time. It was like amazing. It was just such a great. Of course, then we became, you know, close friends. He came, of course, one of the first big speakers that came to Busboys when we first opened was Howard.
Right.
Do you remember that night?
Oh, absolutely.
That was like
it was lines around the
night.
It was lying around the block.
Yeah,
And
lying around the block, people waiting to get him, you know.
So I want you to talk a little bit about how your relationship evolved with Howard, because what comes to mind for me is, again, we've talked about your political awakening, but there was so much enthusiasm around Barack Obama. There was so much. We were so excited. Busboys was just a hub. It was a hub. Andy was all in. Rented a bus because they said Ohio.
I think I spent $100,000 of that.
Ohio was iffy. Andy rented a bus. We went as volunteers to Ohio. We knocked doors. Gail went. So, but I want you to talk a little bit about what Howard told you about Barack Obama.
So when election night, 2008, I'm sure a lot of people remember it. It's still kind of sort of a goosebumpy night. I mean, you have to admit, it was, no matter what you think of the outcomes and everything else that came afterwards, it was definitely a special night, certainly in here in the United States at that time. And we were so giddy that night about the excitement of the win and so on. The next day, I was like, we got to keep this going. This is too exciting. It was like, wow, we got to do something. And so I remember having a conversation with Pamela and other people that were there. I said, what do we do? Should we have a big party? Should we have a big event? Should we have something to celebrate? And I said, why don't we have a ball? Let's do a ball. I've never been to a ball. I don't know what balls do. I don't know what people do at balls. I've never been to a ball. So it was but it sounded like a fun time to have one, right? So we started thinking about the idea of the ball. And then we thought, well, I want to have my favorite person to be kind of like the head of the ball, like the host. And Howard Zinn was the person. So I called Howard. I remember calling Howard on the phone. I said, Howard, can you believe what happened last night? It's so amazing. And Howard says, I see you're really excited, Andy, but I want to remind you, Barack Obama is a politician. And I said, did you have to say that? Did you really have to throw water on my parade like that? So anyway, but after twisting his arm a few times and convincing him that this is different, really, it's really different, he said, okay, fine, I'll be the host, like whatever, So we ended up having him be the host.
And that was the first inaugural Peace Ball hosted by Busboys and Poets. And so it was, we did it in January 2009, and Howard was the master of ceremonies for that event. And
How many people have been to Beast Balls that we've done? So a handful of you. Yeah.
yeah, that was the
Oh,
first
you were
one.
there for the first one. The first one.
It was very
The
fun.
first one was at the National Postal Museum, and it was supposed to be. I think the limit was 1,000 people. We ended up 1,600 people were jammed in there. It was a very exciting night, and we had Joan Baez was the opening musical act, and she came out with a guitar slung across her shoulder, and she sang "Imagine" by John Lennon. That was special.
So, and we're going to get back to that because I do want to ask you about the role joy plays in resistance, but we're going to come back to that. Before that, though, I do want to talk a little bit about, and we've touched on this a bit, but I want to talk about how 9/11, 2001, changed the political landscape and crystallized the need for a gathering place in your mind.
Yes.
So I want you to talk a little bit about 9/11
Yep.
and we're and how that resonated with you, how that shaped what was later to become Busboys and Poets.
Yes, and I want to thank Wayne for stopping the thumping. So thank you. So yes, 9/11 happened. I was at the I was downtown when it happened. It was around 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, right? And at that point, I had Mimi's was one of my restaurants that was open at DuPont Circle, and the other place was Luna Grill and Diner, which was also around DuPont Circle. And I had a place here around the corner for here in Shirlington, where the cheese place is now, who used to be Luna Grill and Diner years ago. So I had three restaurants, and two were downtown DC. And I was in the middle of a health class actually for certification. You have to be certified as a health person or whatever.
Health certification for the restaurant.
For restaurants, a health certification for restaurants. Anyway, so the class just kind of stopped abruptly, and the guy said, "There's something going on with the planes or something like that. We're gonna have to end the class." So into the class, and I walk out into the street, and it's a bright day, and everybody's walking around like crazy, and traffic everywhere. And I was within, 2 blocks from one of my restaurants, and I didn't know what to do. So I walked to the restaurant, and I see it was packed with human beings. It was packed, and the staff was overwhelmed. Everything was and so I went in the back and said, "Well, what do you guys want to do? Like, what should we do?" And everybody was like, "I guess we close." I said, "No." I said, "There's no way we're going to close today. There's no way in hell we could close. What do you do with all these people? Do you tell them to just go out in the sidewalk? These people are here because they want to be in community." I said, "Start making sandwiches. We'll just put them out on the bar. Don't charge anybody anything. This is not about making money. This is about really having community." So the kitchen made a bunch of sandwiches. Many of the waiters couldn't go home anyway. Everybody was stuck. So we ended up, having that. Then I went once I settled Luna Grill, I went to Mimi's. Mimi's, same thing, packed to the gills, and people are standing. We did the same thing. We made a bunch of food, put it out in the bar, and had drinks for people to be able to enjoy, but to also feel like they're part of this community because people couldn't go home. Some people were stuck because of traffic for whatever reason, transportation. Other people just didn't want to be alone because it was a really scary time for people. So, I realized how significant, and the next day, the same thing. The next day, first of all, that day, everyone closed. Like, the minute anybody said anything, doors were locked, sorry, closed. So every restaurant, up and down Connecticut Avenue, all restaurants where we were, closed. We were the only place really open. And it was really remarkable how important that became. That sense of community that was so desperately needed that very moment, to just close and isolate and go home and watch television was not going to be a healthy outcome for anybody. So it was really heartening to see the importance of having places like this, especially during difficult times, because that's when you need them the most. And for us to close was just going to be like a non-starter.
Thank you for that. And with that, I would like you to read uh, just kind of one more thing.
Okay.
And that is because that idea and that knowledge, that recognition that people needed community. People wanted to be in community when something big like that happened. They wanted to be with people that they could relate to. And so I want you to read that bottom part. Because it was really the beginning of the kernel of the idea of busboys.
I wanted to create something that was more intentionally designed for large gatherings, somewhere unabashedly progressive, a place for people to get informed, enlightened, to intersect and find their tribes. I wasn't sure I could make such a place work, however. My other businesses had all started as places to eat and had only become political hubs later. This time, I wanted to begin with the end in mind. Politics and activism would be front and center. I was willing to risk everything to make it happen. I was especially keen that whatever I created would be built to attract brown and black people, people who didn't have the luxury of being neutral on a moving train. I was sure that others would follow. As the old adage goes, build it and they will come.
Thank you. So that was the start. That was the start of Busboys and Poets, and that's where you came with that idea, and you said, "Okay, I'm gonna make something. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna create a space, not just a restaurant space, a political space that is also a restaurant, rather than a restaurant that became a political space." And so, it was that intentionality that also created the conversation that we're having here today, our continuing talk on race. So I want to ask you, how do you create a multiracial, multi-issue community conversation that doesn't lose sight of what it is we're trying to talk about? And I want to just kind of hone in further, because this conversation, I said during the introduction, this conversation about race often varies. We talk about class, we talk about culture. And it was Andy who said to me, this conversation is about race. This community discussion that we're having, a continuing talk on race, it's about race. And in the United States, that discussion has to do with Black people and white people, primarily. Yes, everything else comes in, but I want you to talk a little bit about that. And I remember you said to me, if we can talk about that, we can talk about all the rest of it. It'll all come into play. If we can address that issue, the other stuff will follow. So I want you to talk a little bit about that.
I think too often the talk about black and white is uncomfortable. It's especially uncomfortable for white people. And I think I can understand why that would be the case, because oftentimes they're seen as the bad guys, so to speak. Um, but I, but it's not about skin color. It's about a mindset. It's about the way that people present. So I always thought that if you can address that issue directly, it's much more important than trying to sort of mix it up with the whole DEI thing. You know, where everybody has issues and we all have our shortcomings and whatever, and we all see prejudice differently. Let's all talk about it all at one time and kind of skip over black-white issues. We can't do that. I think that really leaves a huge gap and an unfinished important business that has to be taken care of that deals with black-white issues specifically. If we can deal with the black-white issues, as Pamela mentioned, the rest of the stuff will fall in place. But oftentimes, we mix it up. We talk about immigrant issues, we talk about brown people, we talk about BIPOC, and et cetera, as if it's easier to just lump it up into one big mishmash and assume that it's all going to be solved together. It's not how it's going to happen, and it cannot happen that way. We have to talk about the hard conversations. We have to talk about reparations. We have to talk about all these important issues that oftentimes are seen as divisive or issues that are going to, like, tear us apart, as we're seeing today with what's happening, where they're trying to erase all that stuff, thinking somehow by erasing it, it's going to just disappear. Well, we all know what history looks like. None of these things are going to disappear. In fact, they'll come back much, much stronger and much more fervent if we don't really address these issues head on. So just because you erase DEI, just because you are changing names of places, just because you're removing things from websites, is not going to make these things go away. In fact, it's going to make it far more in your face. People are going to react to this. It's not going to go well. So I always feel like it's important for us to continue to talk about race, because that's the most basic conversation that we have here, and we've oftentimes tried to skip over it. We've done the reparations for the Japanese internment. I saw Bill Clinton do that reparation moment with them. It's like, okay, that's great, and I think it's important to have those moments. But we have never apologized for slavery. We have never really spoken up about the issue of slavery in a more direct way, in a holistic way that's going to not just say it in a let's have another Juneteenth or some holiday, but really address it in a more systemic way, and that's what's missing. And I it always felt like that to me, and I wanted to focus on that issue because I think that is the most important issue in America today. Everything we talk about, whether you're talking about police, whether you're talking about education, whether you're talking about healthcare, whether you're talking about women's rights, gay rights, whatever, blackness is in the front and center of all those conversations, and we have to address them.
Okay. So I was just reminded that I've been asking all the questions, and it's been a fun conversation. Andy and I get together, and we have these conversations periodically. But I would like to hear from you all. I would like to hear your questions, and you can pose your questions to Andy. And then we'll have a wrap up because I want to have that final thing about joy. So Andy,
yes.
I'm going to trade with you the wired mic and have the wireless so that I can come around for questions.
Should I sit there?
Yeah. Our technical dilemma.
I know. Ongoing.
I have Gail, and then I'm going to come to you.
So this isn't really a question. I just want to say that I met Andy when this restaurant opened, like literally within weeks. And I literally brought somebody to West Boys and Post today who had never been here before. And I told him the whole story of Andy. I told her the whole story of Andy. This is my favorite restaurant in the entire world.
Wow.
In the entire world. Not just because it has all the vegan food that I can eat, which I appreciate, but because of everything that it stands for. And thank you so much. This is truly my home. It really is, and I really just thank you for opening it.
Oh, it's so much fun to be here tonight with you, Andy. We go back at least to Mimi's when I brought you someone from a doctor from Israel who wanted to help operate on Palestinians, and we were talking about that way back, so that back in D.C. So, as you don't know, I'm Paul Friedman. I'm the executive director of Safer Country, a gun violence prevention nonprofit. We're doing an event April 16th. Check us out, safercountry.org. But I wanted to talk to you about Amber Ruffin.
About what?
Amber Ruffin is the black woman. She's a comedian from the Seth Meyers TV show. And she was picked for the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And just today I discovered they canned her because Trump put his foot down. And the White House Correspondents' Dinner failed to fight for Trump. And it's April 26th. I'm wondering how you feel about even another revolution at the Hilton in D.C. on Connecticut Avenue to stand up for her, because we can't keep turning our backs while these things happen.
The White House Correspondents' Dinner is a group of spineless bunch of people. I've never seen anything so ridiculous, honestly. I mean, we were there. We were there last year. A whole bunch of us standing in front of the Hilton where they have it, and we were talking about the uh, over, I think, close to 200 Palestinian journalists that were killed, targeted by the Israeli army, and killed. Not one peep from any of them about it, which is really shameful to say. If they're going to be supporting journalism at its best, also the capitulation of so many so-called journalists to be able to settle their lawsuits with Donald Trump and pay him a whole bunch of money, giving him those wins is really pretty abysmal. I mean, we're lucky to have a lot of independent media. That's what I pay attention to these days. It's independent media that's around. And that's really the only saving grace that there is. The other media is just corporate media that just pushes the militarism, division, and really even MSNBC that I think many people probably in this room kind of rely on and turn to has really let us down. I mean, they fired Mehdi Hassan, they fired other people, they've demoted them, Joe Reed, people like that, unfortunately, who are probably the most important voices, I think. Everybody else is just basically regurgitating talking points from whoever they get them from. But these are thinkers that can help us shape dialogue in a different way. I think the media is such a undervalued sometimes. I think leg of our democracy. We think of free media, but our media is not free because they have to buy. They have to have ads, and in order for them to sell ads, they sell them to Lockheed Martin and companies and GE and companies like that trade in militarism and continue to do that. And so, for them to say we have a free media. We don't have a free media. Our media has to be bought and paid for, and oftentimes by those elements that are not necessarily the best for our country.
I just want to thank you for that. I want to just add a quick note. At our event, we'll be showing a 10-minute film created by DC students that was facilitated by the National Black Film Association in DC. And the director of that group will be with us. We'll be showing that 10-minute film. Kids who made a film and want to learn film, and they made it without gun violence in the city. And so it's a powerful opportunity to come and support that. So I hope you'll come. It's on April 16th. Check us out, safercountry.org.
Okay.
Where is it going to be?
It's at a private home in Del Rey.
Okay.
Andy, one of the things that you said about our media that I just wanted to reiterate, it's important for us to support those outlets and those journalists
Absolutely.
that are still telling the truth.
Yep.
That at great risk to themselves, their families, that are still courageous enough to do the work, like Mehdi Hassan. Joy Reid is now on YouTube doing things. Mark Lamont Hill has been ostracized for quite some time for speaking out on Palestine. He can be found on YouTube. So for those people that are courageous enough to still speak truth, to still report truth, we have to support them. We have to send them our $20. We have to join whatever they're doing. We have to be the ones to support the journalists that are still able to tell truth, because that's how they do it. As you said, Andy, we don't have a free media. It's not, and what we get as far as state-sponsored media is propaganda. So
Thank you for that, Tina.
sure.
Yeah, speaking of late-stage capitalism and the progress there, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, you mentioned that the poet was written by Angela Davis. I was wondering if you could talk about your relationship with her. I was at the Columbia event last year with my son, where he got to meet her. And it was really like a multi-generational event for me, like a good event for me. But I was wondering if you could talk about your relationship with Angela Davis and how she supported you over the years.
Actually, she writes it in here that we met in 2013, but we met in 2009. She didn't remember that she met me in 2009. I was shocked. But but anyway, in 2009, she was speaking at an event at University of Maryland, and they brought her afterwards to have dinner at Busboys and Poets at Hyattsville. And I was fortunate enough to be able to join them. It was a small gathering of people. I didn't sit next to her, so I didn't really have a chance to have much conversation directly with her, but I was in her presence. And years later, when I was doing the Peace Ball in the second inaugural of Obama in 2013, Howard by then had died. He had a heart attack and died in 2010, or I think 2010, maybe 10 or 11. Anyway, so I wanted Angela to be the host at that time, and so I called her and I said I would love for you to be the host, and she graciously agreed, and we had she came and she spoke, and I remember that night after she spoke, she came off and we had like a music interlude, and I pulled her by the arm and got up on stage and we danced together. And I thought, dancing with Angela Davis was a pretty cool thing to do. So it was that, and then afterwards we started sort of corresponding back and forth about issues that are happening, what's going on in the world and so on. And she would come here to DC, fairly frequently, I guess maybe at least once a year, and we did a couple of events with her at Busboys and Poets, and they were always spectacular. I think probably the most attended events, I would say, were Angela Davis's events. Wouldn't you say, Pamela?
Some of the most attended, but and again, because of the relationship you built with her, almost every time she came to DC, she would have an appearance at one of the busboys.
Yeah.
And so I think, and this last time was right before the election, where she talked about, she's always been a strong advocate for Palestinian rights, and
Yes.
there was so much conversation and dialogue around what was happening in Palestine since October 7th, 2023. And for her to share her views about where we were in that political moment before the election, to come to Busboys and share those views and to have that conversation with you. I remember us talking much about that, and just her take as an activist, as somebody who has been in this struggle for many years.
If you haven't read her autobiography, it's called Angela. I would highly, highly recommend it. I have to tell you, when I asked her to do the foreword to my book, it was intimidating. I mean, I don't want to ask Angela to do the foreword to my book. I mean, it's a very light read. It's not an autobiography, or it's not. I haven't done amazing things and so on. So when I was reading her book, every page in that book is like history, like so much history. Every page of that book, it was like I had to like reread several pages because there's so much is happening for every page that she experiences in there. And so when I asked her to write the foreword, I was kind of like, Angela, I want to ask you something. I know I shouldn't, but please, if you don't mind, it's like, and so when I asked her, she says, "Of course I'll write your foreword." I was like, "Wow, that's amazing," And she was so wonderful, and it's a beautiful foreword.
Andy, I want to talk about leadership and specifically about your leadership. To my understanding, you have 7 of these cauldrons
8.
of political thought and thought leadership that you assemble people in your community spaces to actually pursue a better understanding of what it means to engage in an American political economy is really complicated. But earlier tonight, you centered on the best way forward for America to find its better and higher self is to actually resolve the issues of the relationships between black governance structures and white governance structures and black civil society. So, please talk about leadership of these political organizations, 7 of them are throughout your restaurants, and then also give us a primer on where you think leadership needs to be for the nation as we find ourselves today.
I'm waiting for them to come pick me up here. Sometimes I'm counting on all of you to be my shields, my human shields. But it's I think I am not an expert in leadership by any stretch of the imagination. I got my MBA about 4 years ago. 4 years ago. So I was 63 when I got my MBA. I was, I think, one of the oldest people in the MBA program at the University of Maryland. Yes, it was hard work. It was really hard work. Doing homework, staying up late at night, taking tests, not open book tests, but closed book tests. Like what the fuck? Anyway, so it was really kind of funny, and I remember thinking because you learn about leadership, you learn about everything. It's a very good program at the University of Maryland, and I remember halfway through the program, I told my professor, I said, if I had taken this class before I opened Busboys and Poets, I would have never opened Busboys and Poets. And it was because the way that leadership is taught and the way that risk is managed and the way that things happen it has no soul in it. It's about numbers, it's about facts, it's about figures. And the most important part about what we do is really the other stuff, right? It's not about the numbers, not about, like I said, when I went to ask for a loan from different banks,
I was turned down
by many because they were looking at numbers and facts. So,
how are
you
you
going to make a bookstore,
a coffee shop,
a free Wi-Fi place,
and a
lounge
paid for the bills?
paid for the bills?
And it's like, I don't know.
Somehow it's going to happen. It's like, because in my gut, I knew there was a possibility of that. I knew I could make it work.
But it's hard to put
those
facts and information.
So it's really, I think that is, sometimes I think in leadership,
we don't give
enough credence
to the other stuff
that is so much more oftentimes referred to as EQ or other things like that. But I think
none of the
facts matter unless you have that to begin with.
So it's funny.
I was talking about in another program I was speaking. I said, how do you hire managers?
And oftentimes,
I remember seeing the Cornell School of Hospitality is one of the top schools in the country for hospitality. So people that want to go to hospitality oftentimes will go to Cornell and get this degree.
And
I've
hired a couple of them, and they don't work out. They rarely work out. They come dressed up really nicely. They have wingtip shoes that are well shined. They walk around with clipboards. They have a timer. And oftentimes a Mont Blanc pen that they got for graduation. And so all of those things to me are red flags. So if you're willing to roll up your sleeves, if you're willing to plunge a toilet, if you're willing to mop a floor, if you're willing to bend down when somebody drop something and pick it up before they do,
to me,
you're qualified to be in this industry.
It's not that easy to get
Not
people.
that easy to get
It
people
really
like
isn't.
that. It really isn't.
But that's really what,
but that's really
I think that's what leadership is. Leadership is about
being vulnerable
being
and
vulnerable and allowing yourself
to
do the grunt work.
do the grunt
Do
work.
the stuff that
Do the stuff that
there should never be
there should not
anything
be
that
anything that
I would never
I would
ask
never ask anyone to do anything that I
myself.
wouldn't do myself.
Or I haven't done
Or I
myself
haven't done
many
myself
times over.
many times over and over.
Never do that.
I would never do
I would
that.
never ask somebody.
I would never ask somebody to clean up somebody's vomit
if I hadn't done it
if I
myself.
hadn't done it myself. If I wouldn't be willing to do it myself. Sorry to bring up vomit.
I also, and thank you for sharing that, for making clear that we're gonna be this restaurant. And, having said that, I do want to say how, just the point that we just made, it's something that is part of style, should empower people and to make clear. We working at the restaurant, we serving everybody that comes in here, that buys in here, So, yes, your job might be social media expert, but this speaker over here, when can you come and fix it? And you talk to us. I also want to thank Wayne for that, as part of our events and we also have the Vice President and Director of Marketing, Alicia Burrow.
All right, Alicia.
Well, it's not these stores and all these events happen at these different locations. And all these cool people come, but it's Alicia and someone like Angela Davis comes. He's offended it. And he's hosting her as a friend. He's there with her, everything she asks, the team that's put together that makes it look flawless. That makes
It really is.
It really is.
It really is, I have to say.
that we have as patients that makes that experience so wonderful. Alicia is not the one that says, ooh, say hi to Angela Davis. No, she gets to have her enjoyment putting that together, that event together for the rest of us. And I just wanted to recognize those
Definitely. Big shout out. Thank you.
And so, I just wanted to make sure we recognized her. And Wayne here today because, Andy has put together this that works really hard and just as he said, you will not come into a store for this crowd, you will see Alicia Buster, you're gonna see Wayne, fixing the thumb, you know, whatever it takes, because that's the leadership that he has provided, and we all know, and we're working for that, no, we're not going to do this stuff.
And
I'm also just to kind of
pick up on stuff he said.
pick up on stuff he said. I'm also
a little bit of a
micromanager.
And
Which is kind of, it's the opposite of what they tell you you're supposed to do. You're supposed to just like do things and let people do it and so on. Micromanaging is sometimes necessary at moments that are key. And I cannot be sitting still. I was out with a restaurateur who I won't name.
we were
at his restaurant. He owns a few restaurants as well. And we were sitting down having lunch at his place. And a couple walked in, and the host was not at the front door. And I'm like, Nancy, I'm like,
we gonna do anything about this? And this person
turned to me, he says, no, I'm not gonna get up and seat them.
I said,
what do you mean? He said, well,
I'm not here
all the time.
This is happening right now.
It's happened many more times.
And I just don't want to be getting in the way
of that. I'm going to tell somebody later
about that
experience, but I'm not going to seat this particular customer.
And it just blew my mind.
I just couldn't understand why that's okay.
And just to tell you one little
short story before we wrap up. I know we're wrapping up.
There are a few more questions.
Oh, okay.
We're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the places I found inspiration sometimes is by going to New York.
So I go to New York.
So I go to New York sometimes early in the morning.
You know,
I'm
Bloody Mary on the
drinking Bloody
way.
Mary on the way. Then I'm like, I get
several
several
stops
along the way
see
to
different restaurants,
see different restaurants, different ideas, places, food, etc.,
And I
etc.
remember one time
And I remember one
there,
time I went there,
and
we were
at a restaurant
in Soho.
And it was a tiny little
It was a tiny little place, the cutest little place.
And I walked in,
and there was no one there but me.
And
And
it was before lunch.
it was before lunch. Lunch hadn't started, and the manager slash owner was there. And I sat down at a booth, and she came up to me and she said hi and so on. And I started a conversation with her. I told her I have restaurants in DC, and I'm looking to get some ideas and blah blah blah. And she said, "Well, welcome, nice to have you." She says, "Yeah, it's been a rough day. Thank goodness my cooks showed up, but the one server that she had did not show up, and so she was like going to be the server and everything else." So I said, "Oh, okay, yeah, whatever, So she brought me a glass of wine, and then a couple walked in, and she came and seated them, and another couple walked in, and she came and seated them, and then a fourth top walked in, and she seated them, and she ran behind the bar. She's trying to get drinks, and she's trying to get water, and she's trying to seat people, and she's doing all this, and then another party walked in, and I looked at her, and she's way in the back at the bar trying to make drinks and stuff like that. So I looked for a second, back and forth. I got up. I went and got menus. I saw where the menus were, and I went and seated them. And I went to the bar where she was, and I said, her name was Carol, I believe. I said, Carol, I know this is weird, but I own restaurants, so we talked about that earlier. So I own restaurants. I know how to do this. So I know how to seat people, and I know how to give them water. So at the very least, I know how to do that. I don't know where everything else is, but we'll work it out. So I said, I'm going to be the host today for you. So she looked at me like, okay, And so I started hosting. So I would seat people. I would go and get water. I would tell them that she'll be right with you. I would hand them the menu. After a while, I even got ideas of what to offer them, And so by the time the lunch ended, we were a team. We were like on it. So it was really so much fun. And she was like delighted that this angel came from nowhere, And so afterwards, I went and sat down, and she came and sat down with me, and we had this wonderful, wonderful meal together after, they finished the lunch rush. So it was great. So I can't sit still. If I come in and I see a space, I don't care whose restaurant it is. If there's a line at the door, if somebody's sitting there, standing there, I probably most likely will get up and help them seat it. So that's it.
We're going to go back to some serious topics in terms of your journey in the book. I also wanted to just remind people that the book is available for sale. Jacob and Sammy can ring that up right along with your order. So if you like the book, just let one of them know.
I just wanted to first thank you for being an ally. And just being, demonstrating what it means to be an ally, especially an anti-racist ally across different racial and color lines. And I'm one of the many people, when you first opened, I saw the name, and I was like, oh, a Black business. And when people said it's not Black owned, the look on my face, and I'm an educator, and some of my students were like, what's that look, Miss Andrew? Like, why are you looking shocked? And part of it was the reality of what I grew up with, right? In terms of people who don't look like me, might be saying they're an ally, but they don't act like an ally. So thank you. And thank you for giving me an example that I can always share with students. Could you speak to what it means to be an ally when it's really hard? What keeps you going? What keeps you at the table, especially when alliances bring inconvenient truths or unintended consequences? And the example that comes to mind is I'm seeing now that the Museum of African American History is under attack. And I remember how I felt when the announcement was made that the ball wasn't going to happen there. And there was a part of me that was like, what's that about? And again, clearly a decision was made. It didn't stop the ball, right? So I'm just wondering, can you speak to how do you stay at this
when things pop up that you have to work around the people that you are an ally to, if that makes sense.
That's a great question. You know, to me, allyship automatically implies privilege. You know, at some level. So to be, for instance, I was speaking to a group of students on an NYU program here that were visiting in DC, and many of the kids were brown and black in this program, and you know, students are under attack these days in a very serious way in colleges and universities. And one of them, a brown young woman, got up and asked, she said, you know, I'm really scared to be able to speak out. What do you suggest that we do as students now? You know, how do we stick our neck out without having it be cut, basically? And, you know, my answer was, you have to be around people that have privilege, and they should be the ones that should stand up. You should not be the person you should not be the person that's standing behind them. In front of them. You should be the person that's standing behind them and let them be in the front. Let them take the lead. So I think sometimes allyship to me implies that you have privilege, that you are able to use that privilege in order for you to make somebody else's life easier or better. So that's how I've always seen myself. I know I have privilege, you know, in some circles for sure, but I know also that I don't have privilege in other circles, and I want to be able to code switch, so to speak. You know, in certain circles, I want to be in the front of the line. In other circles, I want to be a little bit behind, so that allow others who have more privilege to be ahead of me. So if we keep that dance, I think we can really have a wonderful waltz as a society, really.
Thank you for that. And Andy, we're going to set you up to sign some books as well. I want to know if there are any other questions. And Andy, this is like so off topic. But before I give this gentleman the mic, I want you to talk a little bit about your outside activities. I've got a good friend here who followed you on Facebook to your trek to the Everest Base Camp. So I want you to just talk about how that even came to be.
Wow.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Random.
Well, I turned 70 this year, so that's a pretty big milestone. So I know. It's so interesting. At a certain age, you get applause for like turning just by existing, which is nice. But I've always really wanted to kind of not be sitting on my deathbed thinking, if I could have only blah blah blah. You know, I want to be able to get that out of my system. You know, so I wanted, and I'm at an age and at a time where I feel like I can still do those things, right? So I decided I want to do Everest. What the hell, you know? Like I'm not an athlete. I'm not like someone who is like in great shape. I'm not any of those things. But I trained for a little bit, and you know, for 3 months, and I was like, okay, I could do this. And I took my son along with me, and we had a great time, and we did it. And then I wanted to go to Antarctica. I thought, you know, I want to see Antarctica. I've seen it in postcards. It looks pretty cool, and I want to see it. So, went to Antarctica. Had a great time. So, I mean, this is like super privilege. I mean, I know that, but I'm able to do it, and I wanted to do these things. And I like to stay active. That's an important part of my life because I want to keep my energy going. I want to keep doing stuff. I don't feel 70. I don't know what 70 is supposed to feel like, but it's not what I was told it's supposed to feel like for sure. It feels good. Thank you. Thank you. So I think a lot of people like think, you know, like my kids look at me, they say, "Are you going to retire?" I said, "Hell no, I will not retire." You know, so I don't know what retirement means. I don't know, you know, I mean, Pam, you've been out of this work for a while, but you do a lot of stuff. I mean, many people can, yeah, many people continue to do great things, right? So I think oftentimes, we tend to put elders on a shelf at times, and I think elders have a major role to play in this time. I think elders at some level earn privilege. They are able to take risks far more than the students sometimes. So I mean, having those people at the front line is really important. So I would advise and suggest and admonish people who are older, who cannot do whatever, can at least show up for some of these young people, because they are scared and they do want to have support. And I think us being in the room makes a huge difference for them.
Go ahead, sir.
So, Andy, two questions for you. So one is, along your journey, what's the biggest mistake, quote unquote mistake, that you've made from which you've learned the biggest lesson? And then my second question relates to race. The other day I rewatched Barack Obama's A More Perfect Union speech. And I don't know if people remember, there's a segment towards the end that really resonated with me. And I remember it verbatim. He says, here's where we are right now, a racial stalemate. And if we don't do something different, we'll be having the same conversation year after year after year, verbatim. So I'm curious, from Andy's perspective, what's that different thing that we need to do on race? And then, biggest mistake you've made from which you've learned the biggest lesson?
I thank you for these questions. I think we need to be more honest about about race. I think we oftentimes tried, like I mentioned earlier, kind of lump it with a as race, as if it's the same thing, whether you're brown, whether you're Latino, whether you're Asian, whether you're this or that, and whether you're black. It's all the same. To me, it's not. I think we have to address race in a very direct way. The black-white relationship is first and foremost, like I mentioned earlier, and we don't do that. We try to, as I mentioned earlier, skip over that period in American history to get to where we are today, and kind of lump everything together and say, can't we just get along? And it's not a way to solve the problem. So as much as I like the idea of DEI and all that, I think a lot of it is performative. A lot of it really did not necessarily move the ball forward in a very systemic way. So I feel like we need to do. Look, in order for us to feel that we are post-racial, as some people were trying to think about when Obama got elected, now we're post-racial, we have to get more racial. We cannot get post-racial unless we get more racial. So I think it should be a conversation in every school. It should be a conversation in every meeting, in every board conversation. I think there should be, in every school, there should be classes that deal with race specifically, and really have a real clear curriculum in how to talk about race, because I don't think there's enough of that being done, and there's too much fear. And also, one more thing, I think we don't give enough space for people to make mistakes. I think oftentimes one word, one slip, one thing can make you canceled, can just throw you out. I don't think that's a healthy way to deal with any issue, whether it's race, whether it's gender, or anything else. And we have gone a little bit hyper in that space, because if you don't allow people to talk and make mistakes and be corrected, you cannot be able to move forward as a society. I think that's an unfair place to put people in, especially people that are trying to move in a different direction, trying to see the world differently, because people are going to make mistakes. As far as mistakes that I've done in my life, I can't begin to tell you how many. I think there's a lot, but I think I have learned as I've grown that every mistake is really not a mistake. It's really a learning experience, And I know that sounds really trite and really kind of but I really do believe that. I believe the universe creates conditions that make you make certain decisions, and those decisions are meant to be for a purpose. I'm not a religious person, but I'm definitely spiritual. And I feel like every quote unquote mistake you make is leading you to a different space where you need to be. And that space takes you to the next space and so on and so on. So I don't really dwell on the idea of mistakes that I've made because I don't see them as mistakes. I see them as where I am right now, and I'm happy with where I am right now.
And thank you for this conversation. This has really been illuminating. As the gentleman was asking the question about race, and as I heard your response, you spoke a lot about, about being in the curriculum in the schools and all that. I totally agree with that. I believe that education is really an important strategy, I'll call it, an important step for us to get our arms around and eventually solve and heal the race issue. And for me, that was amplified when I I'm not finished yet, the 1619 project.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you mentioned that earlier when you got here late, but I will tell you, when I read, and I came to understand that the first enslaved came to this country in 1619.
Yep. The White Lion, yeah.
It was a big opening for me, right? But moreover, came to this country and that the slave industry, by the time that the country decided it wanted to be independent from Britain, a large part of that was driven by their desire to keep the slave industry going. And if people really come to understand our history and come to understand in a deep way where we began, what our history has been, they can have a better appreciation for why we are here. Because we've done so much to try to cover up that history, and that's on the more conservative side, I'll put it that way. But then those on the more liberal side, when they got control, took it too far the other direction without the history and the context for those others to understand. So it's a back and forth, and no one wins in that game. We win, in my view, when we come to understand our history, and we have a deep level of understanding that begin to appreciate why we are here, and hopefully begin to turn a corner and how we can heal all of us, because we're all injured at some level by the race question. That's where I see it going forward. So your point about education is right on.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, I think the one thing that sort of was illuminating for me in the 1619 project was the fact that if it wasn't for Black people, this country would be a bastion for fascism, which, I'm saying it right now, it sounds weird, right? But it really would have been in that direction far earlier, and I have no doubt that we're going to come out of this also. I have no doubt we're going to come out of this. I have no doubt that the pendulum will swing, and it will swing hard this time. I have no doubt. These dinosaurs that we have right now in Congress, these are the last gasps of white supremacy, and we're seeing them every single minute and every single day. And they're trying to hold on to these tired, old, disgusting ways of operating and the way this country is built. The fact that they can go to different countries in the world and say, this is ours, be able to stand there and with a straight face, without any shame, say what they say in front of other people. The fact that Kristi Noem can go to the worst prison in El Salvador under the ruling of Bukele, who's one of the worst dictators in South America, to be able to walk around in her tights wearing a $50,000 Rolex gold watch, parading her ass around people that are sitting in cages is disgusting. is disgusting. It makes me ashamed to be an American. It really does. And I'm a naturalized American. I wasn't born here. I became an American by choice. And I feel an obligation to speak up by choice because my family decided that we're going to become Americans. That took a lot. It's not that easy. When I became an American, it was 1983, and we had just invaded Grenada, and I had no idea where the fuck Grenada was, honestly. And I was so hurt by not knowing. I wanted to make it my business to know and be a part of this country's development and this country's democracy. And I take my responsibility as an American very seriously. I do. I believe that we, black people, brown people, and those that are not privileged are going to be the ones that are going to save this country. Really.
Hello, everyone. So, although I look young, I'm not young. I came to I came to Virginia from New York about 2 years ago, and this is one of the first restaurants that I ate at, which I was impressed to know that we had a restaurant like this in our community. The first thing that I want to say, as following this young lady, is that the truth must be told. We can't sugarcoat it, we can't cover it, we can't hide it, we can't pull bits and pieces and just put up the piece that we want to put as the part that we didn't suffer. But when we think about it today, in 2025, there's a lot of racism, not just for black people, but for many races of people. However, the black race has suffered more than any other race that walked this universe. And for that, I would say we cannot move forward by hiding the part that we want to hide. Some of my younger black brothers and sisters, we suffer. And we suffer on our jobs. Because we have jobs where we are competent to get that salary that others get, but we don't have a chance of getting it because of our race. So I just want to say, in saying all of this, I've been in school, I've sat under the leadership of historians like Dr. Jeffrey Leonard. I've sat under Dr. Ben Clark and all these people, all these historians that know our history. But until our history is told, the truth, they want to take it out the schools, they want to take it from all the churches and all these different things, but the truth has to be told. So for you, I just want to say thank you, because you've given us a venue where we can open our mouths and speak the piece of what we need to speak. Some of our young black brothers now, they're sitting behind prisons for no reason at all, never did anything, but just because the color of their skin. They were taken, and they don't have money to have that lawyer or that person to speak up for them. So they're sitting behind the bars suffering, but what does that do to our community? What does that do to some of the black mothers in the community that have to now raise the rest of our families? So it becomes a community thing, it becomes a household thing. So we really have to pull back and just realize it's just not one race of people that's suffering, although we are the ones that suffer the most. It's all of us suffering. But I can say this, we suffer, we also made the biggest contribution in this world. Many things that we invented, they're not talked about, but we invented quite a lot. But it's being pushed behind the carpet, behind the doors, so the truth must be told.
Thank you. Well, Howard Zinn used to always say that it's the stuff you leave out of history that tells history more than the stuff you put in.
Yeah.
So it's important, and I agree with
I'm glad you brought Howard back into the conversation, because I want to close. I want you to be able to sign some books, and I want to close by a quote that you have in the book from Howard, and that is, and I think it's so appropriate for the current times. To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It is based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, and kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. If we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places, and there are so many, where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act, and at least the possibility of sending the spinning top of the world in a different direction. And if we do act, in however small a way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an infinite succession of presents. And to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory.
Mm.
Having said that, Andy, I want to thank you so much for the conversation. And Alicia's set up back here for you to come and sign some books. And I want to thank you all for being in conversation today. This was a little bit of a different kind of an after event, but I want to thank you so much for coming, and thank you for being part of our discussion today. I see lots of friends here, so thank you, thank you, thank you.